Hello once again, grade 12s. I'm back, and this time around we're doing the obituary. The format of the obituary is quite similar to the newspaper article and to a magazine article, so some of the features that we will discuss, you'll see there is quite a lot of overlap. What is an obituary? I think it's important that I probably state what an obituary is not. It is often confused with a eulogy. The eulogy is a speech that is presented in a church or at a memorial service. It is written from the first person perspective, and generally people will make statements like, "We are gathered here today. I remember our first meeting." So it is not one person's reflection on their relationship with the deceased, but rather it is a third person account of achievements of the deceased that the writer has collected from various sources. The obituary then is an article written for publication in a magazine or in a newspaper. Therefore, it must follow the conventions of newspaper articles rather than that of a eulogy, which is written from the first person perspective and is a very personalized account of the impact of the deceased on the life of those who have been left behind. Here is an example of a typical question in the examination. Write the obituary for an aspiring local artist who died under questionable circumstances. Please take note of the fact that the words highlighted in purple are the key words. What is an aspiring local artist? It is an artist who is working towards achieving success but has not really made it big. What does the word local suggest? It means it is somebody who lives within, for example, South Africa or in a particular province, etc. The individual died under questionable circumstances, so there is some mystery surrounding the person's death. All of those things need to be taken into account when you write your obituary. Please make sure that you study the question carefully to understand what who the individual was and what their claim to fame in a sense was, as well as the manner in which they passed on. Your structure of the obituary is quite simple and straightforward, and if you follow the format that has been presented below, you'll find that it is not such a challenging ask to complete an obituary. That being said, you must also try to be very diplomatic and sensitive when you write about the individual. Don't try to be tongue-in-cheek, etc. Sometimes it comes across as being extremely disrespectful. So where do you start off? Just like in a newspaper and magazine article, you can have a title or a headline, which is also catchy and which says something about the person's legacy. You will also include your name and surname, and that is called the byline. In your introduction, you will state the names and the surname, the age of the deceased, the date of death. You could briefly mention the cause of death, and you may refer to something about the deceased's legacy or the characteristics, and this will be based on the brief. In this case, you will probably mention something that of the kind of artist the individual was. For example, they could have been an actor or an actress, or somebody who was in the field of music, etc. So you need to make that statement right at the beginning in your introduction. It shows that you're immediately creating a link between the topic and the introduction. Below is an example of a typical introduction. Take particular note of the fact that the details in the introduction refer directly to the context mentioned in the topic. William Romeo Vermeulen, avid sportsman, aspiring jazz singer and wine connoisseur, died under mysterious circumstances in his home in the southern suburbs of Cape Town on the 2nd June 2020. Please note that you are not going to mention specific graphic details about the manner in which the individual has died. You wish to focus primarily on the legacy that the individual has left behind. So what do you include in your body? You firstly include some biographical details, very shortly mention something about a personal history, if there are qualifications, if any. Mention aspects of the career. In this case, the individual is an aspiring jazz singer. You can mention here where the individual studied at or who his mentor was. You can also refer to various achievements, awards that the individual has won, or in this case, at which primary events the individual has performed. You also mention certain spheres of influence, for example, which legendary jazz singers influenced this individual to pursue the art. Include a comment which bears testimony to the deceased's conduct or influence. Here you will use direct or reported speech. So I would suggest in every paragraph of the body, cite what somebody close to the individual or knew the individual mentions about the deceased. For our purposes, this is probably going to be the most important paragraph that you are going to write in your obituary. And here you really have to populate this paragraph with details about the individual's legacy. So what does legacy refer to? Legacy refers to the achievements of the individual and what example the individual was to others, and how this individual will be remembered by family members, by friends, and by fans in this case. So once again, you may include comments from various sources to state what impact the individual had on them. And as mentioned before, you can use direct or reported speech when you do this. You may include the remarks of a number of different individuals in the different spheres of this individual's life. For example, the deceased was a wine connoisseur. The deceased was also an avid sports person, as well as an aspiring jazz singer. Here is an example of such a quote. For example, Dr. John Poppy, who matriculated at the school in 1986, remembers the deceased with fondness, you open inverted commas, and then that individual will now share their feelings about the loss of this great or legendary individual. We now come to the conclusion of this piece, and you can conclude this in a few short statements, wherein you include the date, time, and location of the funeral or the memorial service. You refer to those who have been left behind. For example, you'll make a statement, leaves behind his parents and perhaps his wife. You'll state the funeral service will be held at, and here you mention details of the venue as well as the time slots for the funeral. If it is a Jewish or Muslim person, then you will indicate that the deceased was already buried according to Muslim or Jewish rites on a particular day. Remember, in those faiths, individuals are buried on the same day, so an obituary will only appear in the newspaper after the funeral service had already been conducted. So let us recap what important aspects you have to remember about the obituary. Number one, it is not a eulogy, and therefore it is not a personalized account of an individual's impact on you. It is written from the third person perspective. In your introduction, you have to refer to the legacy that the individual left behind, and you must also make the link to whatever parameters have been stated in the introduction. In your body, you elaborate on some of the biographical details of the individual, mentioning perhaps the influences and the educational background, etc. The most important part And the paragraph which should receive a lot of attention and be well populated is the paragraph wherein you detail the legacy of the individual. You will mention evidence of how they impacted other people and what strides they made in their particular field of expertise. And also, very importantly, the legacy that they left behind. And for each of the paragraphs in your body, you should ideally cite various sources. And here you can do so by using direct or indirect speech. Again, I'm going to reiterate that if you know how to write this piece, you can score decent marks if you follow the guidelines. However, just a warning, if you write a eulogy instead of an obituary, and then you will not be able to score decent marks for this task. Here we have an example of an obituary, which is part of an exam question. An award-winning and celebrated actor/actress has been fatally injured while performing his or her stunts for a new movie due for release early next year. The incident occurred while being filmed on location on the Cape Flats, South Africa. So how are you going to write this obituary? Maybe you should try this. And let's see, once I've gone through the subsequent slides, see how much or how similar your information is to what we have here in our memorandum. As an introduction, we could state the following. Peter Jackson, celebrated actor and winner of 2 Golden Globe Awards, was fatally wounded while performing a stunt for his latest film, which is due for release in June 2021. The acclaimed actor, 41, died in the mother city after repeated attempts to resuscitate him. Here you can see very clearly the links between the topic and the introductory paragraph. So here is an introduction based on the topic that was given, and it has integrated certain aspects referred to in the topic. Peter Jackson, celebrated actor and winner of 2 Golden Globe Awards, was fatally wounded while performing a stunt for his latest film, which is due for release in June 2021. The acclaimed actor, 41, died in the mother city after repeated attempts to resuscitate him. So as you can clearly see, the definitive links between the topic and the introduction. Also, it is written from the third person perspective. There is nothing such as we are gathered here today, etc. Now let's look at how you can or could populate paragraph 2. Compare the notes that you have with the notes that is here. What you should do is give a sketch of the actor's background details, for example, his birthplace, his rise to stardom, and some of the famous roles that he played. You could mention perhaps a brief spell as a stuntman or living on the edge or love of adventure, which links to the information that has been given about the fact that he died while doing his own stunts. Remember, of course, to paraphrase or quote comments from relevant acquaintances, and here you could use quotes from friends, for example, as well as fellow actors or perhaps the director on set. Remember, paragraph 3 deals with the legacy, and that is basically what it is and who it is that the individual has influenced. This is probably, once again, the most important part of your obituary. So you could mention details of the incident, how, when, where, and why it happened. Please mention this very briefly, because graphic details about somebody's death might seem morbid and quite insensitive to many people. What you could include of as much as possible is details of his contribution to the movie industry and to society as a whole. So once again, you're going to paraphrase or quote comments from relevant acquaintances, friends, witnesses to the incident, etc. If you think of an actor, you could interview a fan who could comment on the loss that they have experienced. You could interview a director whom he has worked closely with, who could mention or refer to his prowess as an actor. And so those are just basically examples of individuals whom you could cite in your obituary. And finally, I suppose the shortest paragraph is your concluding paragraph, and here you will refer to the funeral arrangements as well as the deceased's family, and you could name possibly the individuals whom he leaves behind.